What if the first message we received from deep space wasn't a greeting, but a threat? In the year 2157, humanity was at its peak. We had colonies on Mars, satellites wrapped around Saturn, and AI smarter than any human. We believed we were ready for anything. We believed we were alone. Then the signal came. Not a song. Not a language. Just laughter. They were watching us. Mocking our ships, our weapons, our pride. And when their vessels arrived, black giants the size of cities, we understood the truth. We were nothing more than noise in their sky. Our missiles failed. Our bravest pilots vanished. They didn't even fire back. They simply hovered silent, effortless, like gods watching insects. But one woman had been preparing for this moment her entire life. Not with guns. Not with war. With resonance. A sound so powerful it could make metal fall apart. A frequency that could turn an empire into dust. This is the story of how humanity lost the stars and found something deeper. A hidden strength. A forgotten silence. A weapon we didn't understand until it was too late. Stay with me. Because once you hear this story, you'll never look at the night sky the same way again. The year was 2157. For centuries, we had stared into the sky, tracing constellations, searching for meaning in the void. We sent signals. Satellites. Probes trailing behind like breadcrumbs in the dark. And when they finally answered, it wasn't with a whisper of peace. It was with laughter. Inside the control room, red lights flickered. Monitors trembled with static. The sound of data streaming became a rising wave. One technician gasped. Another dropped their coffee. A bright pulse, brief but unnatural, had just lit up the far side of the moon. Not a comet. Not debris. It moved against gravity. It changed shape. They rewound the footage. Played it again. Zoomed in. Behind the veil of lunar shadow, a glimmer twisted like metal folding in on itself. Then, it disappeared. Within 6 hours, every telescope from Tokyo to Cape Town picked up the same thing. A growing shadow. Coming closer. And then, the signal came. A hologram burst into existence. Not human. Not machine. Something between. Tall. Silver-skinned. Its eyes glowed with no warmth. Its voice metallic, but terrifyingly fluent. Earth, your ships are small. Your weapons are weak. Surrender now, or be erased. The message was clear. They weren't visitors. They weren't curious. They were coming to conquer. And then they appeared. No roar. No flame. Just silence. And sighs. Dozens of vessels, each the length of a city, drifted into view like tombstones in the clouds. They cast shadows over entire regions, blocking out sun, blocking out signal. Black. Monolithic. Floating with impossible grace. There were no visible engines. No wings. They simply hung there, defying all logic, all science. People left their cars. Stepped out of office buildings. Looked up. And froze. Children cried. Religious leaders fell to their knees. Military jets scrambled into the sky, tiny darts against ancient titans. And from those ships, they laughed. Not like humans. No humor. No joy. Just a cold, echoing sound reverberating through the upper atmosphere. As if the sky itself was mocking us. a sound that didn't come from speakers, but from inside the bones. That was the moment we understood. We had always imagined first contact as light and music. But what met us was silence, shadow, and a smile without soul. The nations of Earth joined forces fast. Borders no longer mattered. Flags were lowered. Humanity spoke in one voice, not of power, but of panic. From mountain bunkers and floating command centers, leaders formed the Earth Defense Alliance. Hundreds of ships launched into orbit. Our finest engineers gave them the best of what we had. Particle beams, electromagnetic pulses, modified warheads laced with quantum destabilizers. Weapons once meant to destroy each other, now turned toward the skies. But it wasn't enough. The alien ships didn't dodge. They didn't shield. They simply absorbed. Our lasers scattered like light through mist. Nuclear warheads fizzled in silence before they reached their hulls. They didn't even flinch. At Global Military Command, voices rose with every second. Maps of Earth flickered red. Satellite feeds blinked out, one by one. The countdown had begun. Commander Ramirez stared at the screen. His voice, steady but hollow, broke the tension. They're 10 hours from Earth's surface, and we can't stop them. The room fell silent. Hope, once a word used in speeches, had become too heavy to speak aloud. But deep beneath the Nevada desert, sealed behind layers of steel and silence, one woman waited. Alone in the dark, surrounded by hums and flickering lights. She listened not to commands, but to vibrations. Dr. Elena Cho. Physicist. Engineer. Dreamer. Daughter of refugees from an old war now forgotten. For years, her project had been mocked. Ignored. Too strange. Too theoretical. Too soft. Because her weapon did not fire bullets. It sang. It was built on the idea that everything in the universe had a frequency. Atoms. Planets. Ships. Even fear. If you could find the right tone, you could make anything collapse from within. Not by breaking it, but by undoing its very pattern. While missiles failed and generals shouted, Elena's fingers danced over glass panels. Her machine was waking up. And it did not need aim. It only needed a song. The world above her was cracking. But beneath it, something ancient, something unseen, was beginning to hum. Elena had studied quantum resonance for years. Long before the war. Long before the sky darkened. She listened not to voices, but to vibrations. To the quiet rhythms hidden beneath matter itself. She believed the universe was not built with bricks or bolts, but with sound. Every object, every creature, every planet, humming its own silent song. And she believed that if you could sing the opposite note, you could make it all unravel. They called her a theorist, a dreamer. Some even whispered mad. But Dr. Elena Cho never stopped listening. In the heart of her lab, there was no cannon, no warhead, only arrays of glass coils and floating harmonics. A machine that did not destroy with heat, but with harmony. They named it Project Echo. It worked by sending invisible pulses, waves that passed through metal, skin, even time. Not seen, not heard, but felt. Felt in the bones, in the blood, in the bonds that held things together. And if the frequency was right, those bonds would fail. She stood before her team, voice trembling but firm. If we match their frequency, even their atoms can fall apart. Most had doubted her. Many had laughed. But now, no one was laughing. Now, the world was burning. The President of Earth appeared in holographic form, surrounded by sparks and static. He looked like a ghost. Worn. Desperate. Tired of war. He didn't ask for votes. He gave a whisper of command. Activate Project Echo. We have nothing left to lose. Elena didn't hesitate. She turned the final dial. The room dimmed. Lights flickered not from failure, but from interference. The machine had come alive. And across the globe, something ancient stirred. Not a weapon. Not a bomb. But a wave. A single, rising note. Carried on silence. Sharpened by hope. And born from everything we had once dared to imagine possible. Above Earth, space held its breath. No lasers. No movement. No sound. Just the slow, deliberate crawl of ships older than memory. Settling into orbit like giants preparing to feed. They hung there motionless, menacing. Casting shadows large enough to erase whole cities. Solar fields dimmed. Skies turned gray. And across the planet, lights blinked out, one by one. Humanity waited in the dark. Eyes lifted. Hands clasped. Mothers held children close, whispering stories no longer comforting. And in that silence, only one machine stirred. In the Nevada desert, forgotten by history, a lone ship rose from the sand. It did not shine. It did not roar. It hummed a strange, almost living frequency pulsing through its smooth, layered skin. Inside sat Dr. Elena Cho. Surrounded by her crew, scientists, engineers, believers. Not soldiers. Not warriors. Just dreamers, armed with math. The ship had no guns. No missiles. No shields. Only long, curved arms fitted with vibration pods. Gravity tuners spun in silence, bending the very fabric beneath them. And at the center of the control panel one button. Elena placed her hand above it. Her voice, soft but steady, trembled with more than fear. When I pressed this, we might destroy everything. Or save it. No one spoke. The hum grew louder yet still beneath hearing. Like the growl of something enormous, just beneath the skin of the world. She pressed it. There was no sound. Not to the ears. But the air shivered. Leaves stilled. Birds in mid-flight dropped from the sky. Clouds coiled like snakes startled awake. Wind forgot how to blow. And the earth paused. In orbit, the alien mothership trembled. Its surface rippled like liquid metal hit by a stone. Lines formed where none had been. Cracks spread slowly at first, then violently. From nose to stern, it fractured. A groan escaped its hull, not a voice, but the collapse of something old. Then, it began to fall. Not in flames, but in fragments. Large, jagged pieces tumbling toward the ocean. Silent. Dead. For the first time, the sky did not echo with laughter. Only with awe. But victory didn't last long. For a moment, Earth celebrated in whispers. People lit candles, not fireworks. Not in joy, but in disbelief. One ship had fallen. The impossible had cracked. But the stars were far from silent. They came again. Not 10. Not 20. But hundreds. Hundreds of dark monoliths, unfolding from the black like petals of a mechanical flower. They did not hover this time. They advanced. and they did not laugh. Instead, a single ship moved forward larger than the rest. Its surface shifted like flowing stone. Its center opened not with weapons, but with voice. The message came through every channel. No translation needed. It spoke in perfect English, with fury woven into every word. You used the forbidden weapon. You broke the sacred silence. Now, you will suffer. Dr. Elena stood frozen. The room around her hummed with static. But her mind heard something deeper. Not just anger, but betrayal. A terrible understanding took root. The aliens were not invaders, not conquerors. They were watchers. Enforcers of a code written not in language, but in the vibrations of the universe itself. And Earth had just broken it. They had not attacked first. They had warned us. They had mocked us not out of cruelty, but to give us time, to stop, to choose restraint. We answered with force, with resonance, with echo. Elena whispered to no one. We didn't win. We just got their attention. The stars pulsed red. The second wave began. From orbit, energy rippled downward. Not lasers, not bombs, but something stranger. Soft, invisible. Cities flickered. Mountains vibrated. Tides pulled in unnatural rhythms. The same kind of power Elena had awakened was now being turned back toward Earth. And this time, it wasn't a test. The Earth Defense Alliance gathered one last time. Not in a war room, not on a battlefield, but in a deep, echoing chamber beneath Iceland's frozen crust where the planet's heartbeat could still be felt through stone. There were no cheers, no promises of glory, only quiet eyes and the sound of breathing between static. Commander Ramirez stood in the center, hunched over a holographic globe riddled with fault lines. His voice, once made for commands, now carried something older, something almost sacred. This isn't a war of ships, he said. This is a war of ideas. Weapons had failed. Numbers had failed. But there was one weapon left, one belief still standing. Elena stepped forward, her hands trembling from fatigue and fear. She had one last plan. They couldn't outgun the aliens. They couldn't outrun them. But maybe, just maybe, they could hide. Not with cloaking, not with tricks, but with frequency. They would transform Project Echo, once built to destroy, into something new. A planetary shield. Not of steel, but of resonance. A vibration so precise, so perfectly tuned, it would push Earth out of reach, just beyond the senses of alien detection. Like a note too soft to hear. A thought half-formed. An ideal lost in the static. The science was fragile. The risk, enormous. If even one amplifier misfired, the vibrations could cascade, causing earthquakes, collapsing oceans, splitting the crust like an egg. They called it the blind light protocol. And still, no one said no. People came. From every place still breathing. Engineers from drowned coastlines. Miners from collapsed colonies. Children who coded. Elders who remembered the stars. They worked in silence. Built towers that touched the jet stream. Lowered machines deep into the Mariana Trench. Carried wires across deserts, through fire, across borders that no longer mattered. No one asked who would get credit. No one demanded anything. They only asked, where do I stand? And then, the last amplifier was placed. The final coordinates aligned. Elena stood at the core station miles underground. Her hand hovered over the activation panel. The planet, for one breathless moment, was still. She whispered not to the team, but to Earth itself. "Sing with me." And she pressed the button. The world shivered. Not in fear but in song. A low, sweeping resonance passed through every atom. Mountains held their breath. Oceans stilled to listen. Clouds rippled in symmetrical waves. To the alien fleet above, Earth vanished. Not in smoke, not in fire, but in silence. A note too perfect to follow. The alien fleet scanned Earth again. Their sensors pulsed across every orbit, every field, every ocean. They swept through the ionosphere, through cloud and crust. Looking, listening. But this time, there was nothing to hear. Earth was gone. Not destroyed. Not defeated. Just quiet. The resonance shield held. Our frequency masked. Our presence folded into the deeper harmonies of the cosmos. To them, we had vanished. They searched. They hovered. They circled for hours, then days. But they could no longer feel our heartbeat. No longer sense our breath. And finally, they turned away. One by one, the great ships folded back into the black. Like pages turning backward in a book too ancient to be read. Their light faded. Their echoes silenced. And Earth was alone again. Dr. Elena Cho stood aboard a high-orbit station. The Earth rotated slowly beneath her, still trembling from the storm. She watched the last alien shadow slip beneath the stars. Her voice, carried on a private channel, barely above a whisper. They came because we shouted into the stars. Now, we whisper. And wait. The war was over. But not forgotten. Earth had changed. We had changed. We were no longer children dreaming of galaxies, painting rockets on classroom walls. We had touched the edge of something vast, something sacred, and survived. Not by building bigger weapons, not by shouting louder, but by listening to one another, by becoming quiet together. Unity had done what no army could. In a quiet lab, deep underground, Elena returned. She walked through dim corridors still echoing with history. Past broken notes, past burned-out screens. Until she reached her observatory. And for the first time in years, she looked at the stars again. Not with fear. Not with pride. But with something deeper. A reverent silence. Because now she understood. Some things in this universe are not meant to be conquered, only respected. They came laughing, mocking our ships, mocking us. We answered with fire, with failure, with fear. But when everything we built fell to ruin, when the skies burned and hope cracked like glass, one voice, one idea broke through the noise. It wasn't power that saved us. It wasn't force. It was sound. A hidden frequency buried in the bones of the universe. A whisper that made the gods go silent. But the cost? We revealed ourselves. We used a weapon never meant to exist. And the Watchers, those silent guardians of cosmic law, turned their gaze upon us. We didn't defeat them. We disappeared from their view. We made Earth invisible. Wrapped in resonance. Cloaked in silence. Now, we wait. Not in fear, but in stillness. We are not the same species we were before they came. We've seen what hides between the stars. We've heard the laughter and survived it. But one question still remains. One that no shield, no silence, no science can answer. If they return, what will they hear next time? Tell me. Do you think Earth is safe? Or have we only delayed the inevitable? Leave your thoughts below. And if you want to know what happens the next time the silence breaks, subscribe. Because the sky is listening. And somewhere out there, so are they.